Hello friends, welcome back to another edition of our NBA video live stream notebook right here on the one, the only Bleacher Report app. The trade deadline was yesterday, 3 p.m. Eastern time. We're coming to you live Friday, February 6th at 5 p.m. Eastern time. You can't get rid of me just yet. We have a ton of news and notes to get through and kind of sift through the rubble of all that did and did not happen before the buzzer sounded. And Giannis Antetokounmpo, Morant, Domantas Sabonis all stayed with their incumbent franchises. That was the big headline in terms of what did not get done. We had so many former All-Stars get traded, beginning with Trae Young in January, all the way through his new teammate Anthony Davis, and a major stunner that came kind of a little bit out of left field. We started tracking it late Wednesday night, Ivica Zubac to the Indiana Pacers. That followed James Harden being traded to the Clippers. But the guys who did not get moved, what happened? Why did Giannis Antetokounmpo stick in Milwaukee? Why did Morant remain a member of the Memphis Grizzlies? That's where we'll begin today's show. And we have to start with the Bucks, where we kind of got the understanding on Wednesday night when the Golden State Warriors all but pivoted, trading Jonathan Kuminga to the Atlanta Hawks with Buddy Hield in exchange for Kristaps Porzingis. That was a clear signal that the Golden State Warriors believed they were no longer in the mix for Giannis Antetokounmpo. In fact, in the very early stages of that, I was told from multiple people with knowledge of the situation that the Warriors never felt that Milwaukee was really invested in having a true, fair dialogue with the Warriors to get a deal done. The Warriors' draft compensation for first-round picks was a pretty hefty offer. That plus Jonathan Kuminga should have been enough in the Warriors' mind to at least start a conversation in earnest with Milwaukee, but there was never really a counter situation back and forth. The Warriors did not think that Milwaukee, was really offering in good faith and having true back and forth dialogue that would have led to a trade happening whatsoever. So we woke up on Thursday morning with the Minnesota Timberwolves and the Miami Heat still both very much considering that they were in play for Giannis. I checked with someone with Minnesota. I checked with someone with Miami. They both thought that they were in play for Giannis Antetokounmpo. The Wolves, they were definitely having some type of conversations behind the scenes, trying to get more draft capital, trying to figure out how, when, where they could ultimately figure out a way to bridge the gap between not having any draft capital and those 4 picks that Golden State was able to have on the table. Jaden McDaniels, in my opinion, and I think in the opinion of a lot of front office executives around the league, was the best blue chip prospect on the table, and they thought that they being Minnesota, that was going to be enough because Giannis Antetokounmpo, according to various people with insight to this situation, they believed that Giannis definitely wanted to go to Minnesota and team with Anthony Edwards and help him get past the Western Conference Finals. That stage the Timberwolves have yet to achieve. They've made their 2 consecutive runs to the Western Conference Finals. They have not been able to get past that. Giannis did, to my understanding, have some belief that he could be the missing piece, but for whatever reason, we're still sifting through all this stuff. We don't really know exactly yet when Milwaukee decided internally, but they obviously made clear communications Thursday afternoon, that they were out. They were no longer moving Giannis. They were no longer going to engage on trade talk right now, and they're going to pick all this stuff up in the summer. Because here's the thing. As much as Minnesota wanted Giannis, as much as Miami wanted Giannis, and Miami was making some type of conversation behind the scenes trying to get additional draft capital to send to Milwaukee, there's still a hope. We've heard there's still a hope in Milwaukee that if the Bucks will have some type of tanking, rebuilding situation this second half of the season, what type of lottery luck can they get? Right now, the Bucks pick is projected to enter the lottery with the 9th pick, the 9th best odds for the number 1 pick. Can Milwaukee move up a little bit in the lottery? Can they then trade that pick? Can they use other tools in their team building toolkit, other trades to add more pieces and convince Giannis to stay? That is Milwaukee's hope right now. I still think, from my conversations, that Giannis will eventually want to leave, and there will be a more robust marketplace this summer where, depending on what happens in the Western Conference, if San Antonio, after a very fun season, making the NBA Cup championship, putting together a strong group around Victor Wembanyama, what if they flame out in the first round? What if the Houston Rockets, who their GM, Raphael Stone, said post-deadline yesterday, what if this isn't our year? With all the injury stuff that they've been dealing with, starting with Fred VanVleet being out for the season with a torn ACL. What if Oklahoma City, who won the title a year ago, of course, but came down to a Game 7 in the second round against Denver? Like, what if all these teams fall short and you come to the summer and Giannis is available and you have more draft capital, the Heat have more draft capital? I do think that Giannis will get traded in the summer. I don't think that Milwaukee getting some top pick is going to help them ultimately factor so differently in the Eastern Conference playoff picture at large. But for now, he is going to remain a Buck. And the big question, too, is like Giannis is going to want to play. He's going to come back from this calf strain, and he's going to want to play and try to help the Bucks make the play-in tournament. That kind of runs in contrast to what the Bucks want to do in order to get draft capital, better draft capital to help add to him. So that's an interesting conflict of dynamics at play that we'll see how that all ultimately unfolds. But for now, I'm still of the belief that even though this is a will they, won't they for so long, that the Bucks are going to trade Giannis this summer, because no matter what, I do think that there'll be better packages on the table from a Miami, from New York, even after he posted, yes, DK596. All the trolling he's done on social media, I think, is just that. I think it's just trolling because, look, he wants to win a title. He wants to compete for a championship. And the Bucks are not in position to do that. They are not in a position to do it now. And it's going to be an incredibly tall task to do so this summer. So we'll see. We'll see. But for now, I think, as Mystic Nomad is saying in the chat there, the big difference is going to be Giannis will have 1 year left on his contract before a player option in 2027, 2028. So he'll have more control. That's the big difference in this dynamic between now and then. He'll have some more influence, being able to steer himself away from certain situations like Kevin Durant did a year ago. Let's get to the chat. And the first chat question's about this. They're going to convince Giannis to tank and boost the pick to flip it for someone. That's a major interest because, like we just said, tanking and bottoming out is without a doubt within the best interest of Milwaukee and Giannis if they want Giannis to stay. But Giannis is going to want to play. We've got that on good authority that Giannis is going to want to play. And that is, of course, going to be in direct contrast to them losing games and bettering their draft position. Someone says, I don't think they were ever going to trade him. Yeah, I mean, I don't think they ever were either. I think this whole situation was clearly the Bucks canvassing the marketplace, getting information, collecting data about certain priorities. You know, when teams call and they say, hey, we're interested, and you start working through, okay, you figure out, all right, the Golden State Warriors are more attached, to example, for Moses Moody than they are Buddy Hield. Like that type of stuff. Learning that now is beneficial to a team coming back around in the summer and figuring out things in the future. Let's keep it moving along because there's been a lot of comments in the chat about my mustache, good and bad. We acknowledge all the positives, and anyone saying not nice things, there's no need to be mean. There's no need to say anything not nice. We're just talking basketball here. The trades that didn't happen, I think number one, we talked about Giannis. Let's go to Ja Morant too, because Ja Morant and Domantas Sabonis, both of them, did not get traded. For Ja, I think ultimately the market and the value on Morant was very similar to what Trae Young's was in Atlanta, where for him it's been off-court stuff, injury stuff, lack of wanting to play at times this season. He's held himself out of games, to my understanding. And Memphis Thank you, Sports Watcher 1. Memphis, that's LFG, baby. I appreciate you. Memphis wanted to get draft capital and positive draft capital for Ja Morant, and if it was out there, they would have taken it. I believe their only real chance at getting first-round draft capital yesterday, Thursday, before the trade deadline, would have been from Milwaukee. There was, I'll be candid, I don't know as many specifics as I'd like to, but there was a lot of conversation behind the scenes, a lot of information texting around between front offices about the Milwaukee Bucks being involved, trying to get Ja Morant as late as yesterday. Number one goal for Milwaukee was they wanted to take back minimum salary for some draft capital. You saw them do a similar trade with the Suns, taking on Nick Richards and Nigel Hayes-Davis. They were looking potentially at getting Cam Thomas, but there was no deal that materialized there. I don't think the Nets really wanted to compensate anyone for taking on Cam Thomas. That's why the Nets just waived him altogether. So, for now, Ja Morant remains a Memphis Grizzly. I do think the only first-round pick they could have gotten, in theory, would have been from Milwaukee, but the Bucks, to my understanding, did not want to part ways with their 2031 protected pick or unprotected altogether. So, without a doubt, I think Milwaukee has that pick in mind to make other additional moves and buy with it this summer. But the Ja Morant addition, I think, would have been interesting for Milwaukee in that we talked about this yesterday with my Hall of Fame partner, Mark Stein, on our Substack, The Stein Line, markstein.substack.com, that the fit between Ja and Giannis is not ideal, but if you could get a 26-year-old former two-time All-Star in the door right now to potentially play with Giannis and have as an insurance policy if Giannis were to leave, that'd be an interesting dynamic to me if you're a Bucks front office executive or a Bucks fan. But the other teams we heard pretty consistently linked as potential Ja suitors were Sacramento and Miami. And look, I can tell you without a doubt, the Kings people I spoke to routinely told me they did not have interest in Ja Morant. And if they were to make a deal for Ja Morant, it was going to be at a basically salary dump level, something that cost them virtually nothing, something similar to Washington acquiring Trae Young. And there was also plenty of clear indication that the Kings heard, that I heard, that Ja Morant didn't have interest in joining Sacramento himself and would not have signed an extension there either. So to me, I never really considered the Kings a viable landing spot. And lo and behold, he is not in Cowboy Kingdom today. Miami was the interesting one because there was definitely smoke and noise that the Heat were trying to pull off both Giannis and Ja Morant. And to my understanding, the Heat weren't even really that serious. The Heat, from a conversation I had Wednesday night before the deadline, they had not really checked in on Ja for several days. They were far more preoccupied with Giannis. And that takes us to a chat here. Who else is Miami looking at? Well, Giannis is still going to be, I think, the Heat's ultimate goal. Someone saying they heard Miami wanting Dame Lillard. Dame Lillard's in Portland, and I think he's in Portland to stay. There's definitely some thought for the Blazers that Dame Lillard coming back from an Achilles tear next season will help the Blazers with newly crowned All-Star Denny Avdia. They'll help them compete and get back into the playoffs next year. I don't see any world where Dame is getting into a different situation. I see a chat from Bleacher Report itself. What about Drew and the Greek Freak reuniting? There was absolutely some conversation that happened behind the scenes between Giannis and Drew about playing together, having a bit of remorse over their time coming short in Milwaukee. But I don't think Giannis ever wanted to go to the Blazers. As much as the Blazers were calling on him, that really was never anything that seemed to be a likely scenario. On the Kings front, to continue out this trade that didn't happen, the Kings, to my understanding, going into Wednesday, only thought that Toronto and Washington were the two possible landing spots for their all-star center, Domantas Sabonis. And then Washington came out of nowhere. they didn't exactly come out of nowhere from the operating procedure standpoint. We had heard and reported that the Wizards were shopping around Chris Middleton's $33 million expiring contract and some draft capital and trying to see what type of center they could add. We know they called on Domantas Sabonis. We know they called on Karl Anthony Towns in New York as well. There was some conversation about them coming and calling New Orleans about Zion Williamson. He's not exactly a big man, but regardless, Washington definitely was on the phone seeing what type of front court addition they could add to Alex Sarr with Chris Middleton. So the fact that they did turn Chris Middleton's salary into Anthony Davis really should not have been such a surprise, but it was a shocker because that word was not around the league whatsoever, even though we knew that the Wizards had shown that card of a Middleton outgoing package for a big man. The talk on Anthony Davis was not there. So the second the Wizards went and got Anthony Davis, that kind of took a lot of Sacramento's leverage with Toronto trying to get first-round draft capital for Domantas Sabonis, and the Raptors were just not willing to do so. There was additional friction there in the valuation on that draft compensation because the only contract of significant consequence that Toronto that was offering that Sacramento was willing to take back, to my understanding, was R.J. Barrett, who Kings general manager Scott Perry was in New York for in 2019 when the Knicks drafted Barrett number 3 overall. But Jakob Poeltl's contract was considered onerous around the league. There was some buzz, and I think that's part of why the Grizzlies thought they had Sacramento still in play for John Morant. The Grizzlies made a $28 million trade exception when they sent Jaren Jackson Jr. to Utah, and the Grizzlies were open, I have confirmed with various sources, that they were open to taking on Jakob Poeltl's contract into that traded player exception for draft compensation. So I thought there was a scenario where it could have been a 3-team team with Sabonis going to Toronto and RJ going to Sacramento and then Poeltl going to Memphis in some scenario, but that never materialized because the Raptors, even though they looked at a lot of different big men, they had conversations on Daniel Gafford in Dallas, to my understanding, but the Mavericks wanted a first-round pick for Gafford themselves, and the Kings wanted some type of first-round draft capital and then some for Domantas Sabonis. And that just proved too rich for Toronto's blood. But the Kings will have another opportunity this summer to move on from Sabonis if they want to. They're not going to have a home, even though I never heard this, for him in Indiana, because the Pacers did go out and they made a wild, in terms of aggressive move, in 2 first-round picks and then some for Ivica Zubac, which is going to bring us to our 2026 NBA draft portion of the show. Because all of the activity that did and did not happen at the trade deadline, it sets the stage for this summer. The 2 most, I think, interesting aspects from a free agency standpoint, which we'll get to at the end of the show, are Washington and Utah using up their expected cap space on Anthony Davis, Trae Young in the Wizards, and Jaren Jackson Jr. going to Utah and taking up that space. But look no further than the Indiana Pacers, being that they sent, we talked about this live as all the details were unfolding, that I would have been surprised if the Pacers, while they are certainly in a gap year and looking at getting a top pick to add to Tyrese Halliburton. You see the details on the screen right there. Us first reporting yesterday that one of the 2 picks going to the Clippers for Ivica Zubac is the Pacers 2026 first rounder. And it's some of the most interesting protections I've ever seen. It's protected 1 through 4, which that, for fans who aren't up on the new lottery rules, there's now 4 drawings in the lottery. I'm in that back room in Chicago every year. They have this simulator that 14 ping pong balls go in. They pop out 4. It's a combination, 1, 2, 3, 4. Then they seed teams from 5 through 14 after that in reverse record. So that 5 through 9 wrinkle of all this, that the pick would go to the Clippers. If the Pacers don't get a top 4 pick, that pick is basically guaranteed to go to the Clippers right now. It's a hedge to me for both sides to basically get a share of a first-round pick, because if it doesn't convey this year to the Clippers, if the Clippers don't get a pick 5 through 9, which is important for Los Angeles from their team building perspective, because their pick is currently already going to OKC unprotected no matter what, as a vestige of the Paul George trade from years ago, then that pick will become a 2031 unprotected pick from the Pacers to the Clippers. But there is so much at play here in the lottery. The lottery is going to be bonkers because, again, the Wizards, they'll have their cap space we just talked about. We'll get more to that in the summer. That's been impacted by Trae Young and Anthony Davis. But the Wizards also want a top pick in this draft too. And their pick is top 8 protected. Right now, the Wizards would be entering the draft lottery with the 5th position. And because of that, we are not expecting there to be much activity from Trae Young, if at all, or Anthony Davis, if at all, this season. So they made these 2 acquisitions of former All-Star talents. We're not expecting to see them on the floor at all, if anything, because the Wizards have every incentive to keep that pick. Same thing with Utah. Utah getting Jaren Jackson Jr., the Jazz pick is 1 through 8 protected. And if it's not, it goes to Oklahoma City as well. They're currently in the 6th position right now. So they got all the incentive to lose games and hold on to that draft pick as well. Portland's pick is lottery protected, but they, showed that they were interested in being buyers by going, it wasn't a massive move, but they added Vit Krejci for 2 second-round picks. The Blazers were sniffing around for other additions. I've definitely heard that they still hope, or did hope at least, entering the week to compete for a playoff position, so that'll be interesting. And the Clippers, like we talked about, I don't think this absolutely signals that the Clippers, even though they traded James Harden and Ivica Zubac away, I don't think they're necessarily going into like a rebuild right now because their picks are still out the door. They have every incentive to keep winning games, to keep building winning tendencies under Ty Lue once they get Darius Garland, Benedict Mathurin, and Isaiah Jackson in the fold, in addition to the 2 first-round picks and a second that they got from Indiana. Let's get to that chat right there from Tom D. Banks. What happened to the Sixers? Because Philadelphia, they're as positioned as any team to win in the Eastern Conference, and I really thought that they had a combination of expiring contracts and draft capital to add someone of real consequence, and they did not. By trading Jared McCain to Oklahoma City, the Sixers got under the luxury tax. They got enough draft capital back if we want to keep that on this 2026 draft theme as well. They get the Rockets pick from OKC, which that pick right now is going to be 23rd. And I was speaking to an agent yesterday who has several clients in the college game right now in addition to the NBA. This 2026 NBA draft is considered to be so deep with talent. This agent said to me that the 25th pick in this year's draft is going to be the equivalent talent level wise of your standard number 15 overall pick. So for the Sixers, while I'm sure it's tough for some fans to accept losing a top rookie who looked like he was going to be the rookie of the year a year ago for just a first-round pick and 3 seconds, that first-round pick could be really valuable, and that's a range where Philadelphia has thrived. They got McCain in the middle of the first round. They got Tyrese Maxey at number 21 overall. They're very confident, the Sixers group, in their scouting department, so we'll see what type of gold they could potentially strike again. I think it's definitely disappointing, though, if you're a Sixers fan, because you want to see this team with a healthy Joel Embiid finally, with Tyrese Maxey playing at an all-star starter level. You wanted to see them add something, but that's not what Daryl Morey did. Do I like or hate the Zubac trade? I think it's a very fantastic deal for both sides. I think it was super important for Indiana, clearly, to get their business done now. They could have waited till the summer. They could have thrown an offer sheet at Walker Kessler or tried to trade for him then. They could have revisited Daniel Gafford or whatever, but they wanted to go and get a big man in their building right now who could assimilate to Indiana and their playing style, who could get comfortable in the building so that he's there and ready for when Tyrese Halliburton gets back on the floor and they can grow together and try to compete for the Eastern Conference crown. Again, the Pacers, make no mistake about it, they wanted to get a center who was in the thick of his prime, who was going to be a pick-and-roll partner for Tyrese Haliburton to replace Miles Turner and try to get the Pacers right back to the NBA Finals where they were a year ago before Haliburton tore his Achilles in that very, very devastating Game 7 injury. So they were canvassing a wide net, right? They called about Onyeka Okongwu in Atlanta and Jared Allen in Cleveland, and Gafford was their other choice. Ivica Zubac seemed to be their number one target, and the Clippers needed 2 first-round picks to do so. The Pacers weren't going to be able to afford Benedict Mathurin. They bring in their big man in Zubac, who they wanted to. I see that chat right there on the screen from CalBevan94 that Zoo's contract alone is a steal. He is under team control for the next 2 years, around $20 million. So I think it's good work from the Pacers, and I think it's good work from the Clippers as well, because if they don't get a 5 through 9 pick in this draft, which is considered a very deep draft like we just talked about, then they get 2 unprotected picks in 2029 and 2031, which that's far enough into the future that you have no idea how good those picks could theoretically be. Look, the Pacers right now, 1 year after being in the finals, they're slated for the 3rd best chance at the number 1 pick in the draft. So who's to say what type of upside those picks could have? Let's get to the buyout market, because that is where a lot of the league's attention is on right now, finding two-way contracts, finding new homes for veterans that were traded and waived. Right now, the most interesting story to me is that there's a bit of a loophole situation going on in Minnesota. We talked about this the other day. Mike Conley is set to rejoin the Timberwolves because he was traded twice. If he was just traded to Chicago and waived, he would not have been eligible to go back to Minnesota, where he's been a real veteran leader in that locker room. He's been a huge piece of what the Timberwolves have built behind Anthony Edwards since he got traded to Charlotte again in that deal that brought Kobe White to the Hornets. He, by all indications, is going back to the Timberwolves. I saw a chat about Lonzo Ball to the Hornets. I have been given every indication to not expect that. Right now, I'm waiting for confirmation, but I have heard that Lonzo is in play for a Western Conference contender. That is probably one of the more interesting dynamics for him. I will try to bring more information to you guys on that when we have clearance to do so, but for now it seems early. Chris Middleton definitely has an opportunity to get a buyout if he would wish. He's showcased enough scoring chops this season that I do wonder what type of opportunity there will be for him to find a home. Look at that. Mid-range step back, vintage Chris Middleton. We'll see where he could find a home. I haven't heard of a destination right now, but he definitely is very focused on fit, because Chris Middleton, like most veterans, he's on a $33 million deal right now. He was interested in sticking around Washington, to my understanding, if there wasn't a trade that materialized for the Wizards, because he would have thought that there was an opportunity to make more than the veteran minimum. And that's a very important detail for all these guys. Once you get put on the veteran minimum, it's very hard to make north of that ever again. Look at Russell Westbrook right now. It is a perfect example of how difficult it is to make significant money once you become a vet minimum biannual type of guy. So I think the only situation that Chris Middleton would accept a buyout for is if he saw a real situation to join a winning team that had a real chance that could potentially position him for greater earning potential next summer. Haywood Highsmith is someone that should have some real interest. Let me pull up my Haywood Highsmith notes as I talk. Haywood Highsmith never really got to play with Brooklyn as he was trying to rehab from a knee injury, got traded from Miami in a cost-saving move from the Heat. But Haywood Highsmith is someone who started for Miami deep in the playoffs, who made a finals appearance and has real postseason chops. He'll have some interest from contenders and playoff teams. My notes are not loading. Where are my Haywood Highsmith notes? Come on, Google Docs. Let's see here. Haywood, we're doing this live on air. Haywood. I don't have any teams popping up. Come on, where are they? All right, we'll forget about that for now. Another interesting name on here, Pat Connaughton, who was a great locker room presence in Charlotte. He got waived. Could he potentially go back to Milwaukee? That's an interesting thought to me. He's been a big piece of that organization for some time. Matisse Thybulle, many people expect him to get a buyout in Portland. That's another name to monitor. And I'd say also, not that he'll play anywhere, but now that Terry Rozier can no longer be an outgoing salary in Miami's trade efforts for landing Giannis Antetokounmpo, the Heat wanted to buy out Terry Rozier in the very beginning of the season, and we'll see. Stein, I always told you not to use Google Docs. What's up, man? Terry Rozier, I believe there's no real reason why he would not find a buyout now. He won't be playing this season as he's still under suspension during the FBI gambling probe. He won't be used as a contract in a trade. So there could be some conclusion to his time in Miami there. I have not heard anything about Cam Thomas to the chat. I haven't heard anything about a team that would want Cam Thomas. The one team we heard was Milwaukee, but they did not want to pay draft capital to acquire him. Could he go to Milwaukee now? It's possible, but that's the only real spot I've heard with Cam Thomas interest all along. Jeremy Soham, never really heard of a team that really wanted him either. It was more so of an outgoing thing that he was trying to find a trade, that San Antonio was trying to use him at one point for Keon Ellis. Don't know of a real Jeremy Sohan landing spot right now. Last question. You know who didn't have trade value? Sabonis. The Kings got 0 offers for him. No, Sabonis did have some value. Toronto did like him. I just think the complication there was, and I'll get to that Cam Thomas chat. The complication there was that Sacramento just didn't have expiring salaries. Like, part of what was able to make that Kristaps Porzingis, Buddy Hield, Jonathan Kuminga deal happen was that all those teams had expiring money. Chris Middleton goes to Dallas for Anthony Davis because he's expiring money. The Raptors did not have expiring money, and that made it very difficult from a draft compensation standpoint to find a deal that was equitable for both those sides. The Brooklyn chats. You know, there was a lot of talk about maybe Michael Porter Jr., and to my understanding, the Nets never really wanted to move him. I had heard of one team trying to make a play for him at the end. I'm still waiting to confirm that. But I think there's far more expectation around the league that the Nets either wanted to keep Michael Porter Jr. to trade around him this summer, or that even in a more wishful thinking, that Brooklyn could potentially use him as the outgoing salary to go trade for Giannis themselves this summer if they're able to add a second piece to him, just like they did for Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, just like the Clippers did for Kawhi Leonard and Paul George. I'm not saying that's definitively what Brooklyn's plan is, but there are plenty of rival executives who have that on their radar without a doubt. Desert Phoenix says, honestly, Alvarado was a very good pickup for the Knicks with Deuce McBride out, and true regardless, without a doubt. But I'll say that the Knicks were looking to add point guard depth even before Deuce McBride got hurt. They've been looking to find and fill in that spot ever since Malcolm Brogdon retired suddenly during this preseason run. Colin Sexton, question about him. I mean, Colin Sexton could be on the buyout market for sure. The Bulls have so many guards from Anthony Simons to Jaden Ivey in play there. There's no real expectation, I think, that the Bulls are looking to bring Colin Sexton back and keep him in the fold there. Who do I see the Knicks picking up on the buyout market? I haven't heard of anyone for New York at this juncture specifically, but the Knicks are still open, to my understanding, in finding front court depth. They got their backup guard in Jose Alvarado. Could they find a nice young center there? We'll see. I mean, I think one of the more intriguing big men on the buyout market right now is Chris Boucher. He'll have some interest as a vet minimum guy. He might be the best shooting big man available who you can add. George Niang will be available. He needs to get healthy, but George Niang is going to be someone who can provide some front court shooting help. And no, again, Lonzo Ball, I'm not expecting to go to Charlotte at this juncture. Okay, let's go to 2026 free agency to round out today's show, because the trade deadline and the free agency period before this trade deadline, every transaction cycle sets the stage for the one before it. And you can be very, very certain that Giannis's unresolved trade sweepstakes are going to loom over all of free agency, particularly with the fact that the one team of real consequence that is going to be a good team that has salary cap space, the Los Angeles Lakers, they did not make any real strong effort to acquire Giannis right now. But we wrote this on the Stein line. It was Mark Stein himself who wrote it, that the Lakers are definitely going to factor into Giannis's trade sweepstakes this summer. We've been given indication that Los Angeles, and why wouldn't they be, are a team and a situation that Giannis would have interest in joining. He was, to my understanding, looking at Dallas along with Miami back in 2020 when he wanted to potentially leave Milwaukee before the Bucks traded for Jrue Holiday, and Dallas had Luka Doncic at that point in time. So I think it's the Luka draw, the Lakers lure, and Los Angeles altogether that could very well be a factor for Giannis. But regardless, the Lakers are going to have a lot of salary to play with. I have not heard them connected to anybody in the buyout market, to those asking in the chat right now. But they've always been a player in the buyout market, just recently with DeAndre Ayton this past summer. So we shall see where the Lakers ultimately go. But the fact that they just made one small move on the margins, turning Gabe Vincent's expiring contract into Luke Kennard's expiring contract, I think is another key indicator that Los Angeles, as we've been saying and writing and reporting, that the Lakers were more focused than not on maintaining flexibility for this upcomer's spending power. They definitely want to bring back Austin Reeves. That's no secret. They will have to consider a future with or without LeBron James, as he is an unrestricted free agent for the first time. And as we've been saying, there's already talk about Cleveland and New York and what other potential next destination LeBron could join. But there is still an open door for him and the Lakers to continue their partnership together beyond their first 8 seasons that achieved one championship together. So we'll see. Could there be a sign and trade type situation where Austin Reeves goes to Milwaukee? I saw that chat. To be honest, when there was some early preliminary, conversations about that, I checked in on that. I don't think I have not been given an indication that that's a situation that Austin Reeves would be very appealed by currently, but it's only February 6th. We'll see. The other big domino with the 2026 free agency period that we are going to be considering is restricted free agency, because whether it is the Lakers, whether it's the Chicago Bulls that are going to have an opportunity, there are plenty of talented two-way wings that are in precarious situations in terms of their current teams and their pocketbooks and their cap sheets as to what they can do. From Tari Eason to Peyton Watson, we'll see ultimately who could potentially throw an offer sheet at one of those guys. It'll be interesting. Would it be Brooklyn? We've heard some buzz already there. They're going to look to spend. But again, there's going to be a little bit of a thinner market in terms of teams with cap space, because the Wizards and the Jazz, two teams that were expected to be major players in the marketplace to have somewhere of $50+ million in cap space, that has gone poof with Jaren Jackson going to Utah and with Anthony Davis and Trae Young in the door in Washington. So it's going to be a stricter market for teams that have money to spend. It's going to be more difficult for free agents to find a payday on the open market. So that will set up a very key opportunity, I think, for several teams and players to benefit by way of sign and trade. So that's something we'll be monitoring, and we'll be breaking down the leftovers of the trade deadline, the buyout market, and start inching our way towards coaching carousel stuff and whatever next week, Tuesday, 5 p.m. Eastern time, and we'll be back to our regular scheduled Tuesday 5 p.m. show every week from there on out, right here on the Bleacher Report app. But for now, we appreciate you tuning in to this week's final NBA trade deadline edition of our video NBA Insider live stream notebook. For now, take care, y'all, and have a good rest of your weekend. See ya.